got to race him. You can't just sit back.
Now, Fogle does have life gain in his deck. He's got, of course, Courser of Crew Fix, 3 copies of that, along with 3 copies of Scavenging Ooze in his main deck as well. So this one's kind of back and forth. I don't know who it does favor, but we'll watch it unfold as Fogle's going to play Temple of Abandon. Top card's going to go to the bottom, pass it back over to Bernal, who's going to play a Sacred Fountain before passing the turn back. It's actually kind of tough to put Bernal on burn, simply because when you think of him, especially in Legacy, he's always playing a Stoneforge Mystic and a blue deck. So when I think of Joe, I always think of some sort of blue strategy. But there are no revelations to be found here for Joe this particular weekend. So we'll see if Jack can deduce what Joe's up to based off of just a Sacred Foundry on turn 1. Fogle going to go down to 18 from a Stomping Ground. Followed up with a couple of Elvish Mystics before passing the turn back.
So that's a pretty good start for Fogle there. He's going to get that mana ramp into play. He can get a big threat. He's taken 2 from his lands, but again, Joe doesn't really have that much going on.
Searing Blood going to take care of an Elvish Mystic, so now Fogle knows exactly what he's up against, and probably got to get the show on the road here, as there is a Courser of Crew Fix, his draw for the turn.
That was a great draw here, but is he going to play? It looks like he's just going to play Palakranos.
Yeah, you mentioned this is a good way to get things going. A turn 3, 5/5. It forces Bernal to have Chain of the Rocks right now.
Yeah. And again, if he's casting Chain of the Rocks, there's a good chance that maybe he's not able to develop his board any further. So, and you can always play the Courser next turn.
So Bernal does draw his card. There's a Mutavault and a Mana Confluence in the grip. Not sure the rest of the contents just yet. But he will have to deploy them eventually and let everybody at home know exactly what he's holding if he wants to get back into this one.
Ash Salad here would be sweet. Give him some sort of way to kind of attack Jack repeatedly. But yeah, I'm just... Chandra's Phoenix, rather. Sorry about that. But yeah, let's see here. That 5/5, see, this is exactly what we the start that we kind of expected Jund Monsters to have in order to beat a red-white deck. Turn 3, Fatty. Whether it's Rampager or Palakranos, either way, you can put some pressure on Joe.
Mana Confluence, the land that Bernal plays, and he's just going to pass the turn back over to Fogle, who will untap those lands, that Mystic. He will take a draw again. He does have a Courser in his hand. Also has a copy of Xenagos the Reveler. Not at its best in this particular matchup. Really just 4 mana for a 2/2 haste creature.
Yeah, so you could play the Xenagos here. Maybe he's afraid that Joe might have Skullcrack, so the Courser life gain might not even happen. And it looks like that is what's going to happen.
Okay. So that's going to come in. Satyr Token probably going to join the party as well here in just a moment. And Jack's really just going to put the pressure on here.
Yeah, if he attacks for 7, Joe drops to 13, and then he can attack for potentially 9, 11 next turn with the Mutavault as well. So pretty good turn here for Jack.
So there's your Satyr Token, and it's time to get into the red zone. So there's your attack for 7. Bernal is going to go down to 13. Fogle going to play a Stomping Ground, tap, and pass the turn back. He could have held that Stomping Ground because he has a Courser in his hand, but developing the mana just may be more important at this point in the game, and not taking any damage to do it.
Yeah. So it looks like Joe has a couple of options here. He's got Wild Guess. He's got Magma Jet. Looks like he's got maybe another Searing Blood.
Wild Guess, kind of this highly debated card in this deck. Tyler Wynn winning in Knoxville with 2 of those in his deck, and he said that the card was a big deal for him over the course of the week. And here's a Boros Charm that's going to go upstairs, going to put Fogle down to 11. You know, he said that Wild Guess was huge for him, and then, you know, there are some other people who played it and said it was absolutely terrible when giving the deck a try. So, you know, the camps are definitely split on that card. That's for sure.
So Joe looks like he could be, depending on how much more burn he has left in his hand, it looks like he has a Magma Jet and a War Leader's Helix. So the War Leader's Helix can buy him some life, so he should be able to survive the next attack if he can cast it. And that would drop Jack down to 7.
Helix is so important.
Yeah, he's got a Mutavault as well. So yeah, this is going to be close. He's got the Chandra's Phoenix as well. So let's see what he decides to do here. I wouldn't be surprised if he just plays the Mutavault and passes and tries to burn Jack out. That War Leader's Helix always changes up the math dramatically.
Yeah.
Jack obviously has to be wary of it. He knows this deck. See, the thing here, Joe might be thinking about trying to cast a Chandra's Phoenix here, or maybe even the Wild Guess, but I think he has to maximize his mana in this position.
And he can't afford to go up to the creatures, right? Like, it's just all got to go upstairs.
I think it has to go upstairs, especially because of Xenagos. I think it has to go upstairs here. Plus, he can realistically kill Jack if Jack makes a mistake. Like, if he drops him down to 7 and Jack just swings with everything, he can attack him with a Mutavault and the Chandra's Phoenix, and then that's actually he has a Magma Jet in his hand too, so dropping to 7. Yeah, it's gonna still be close, but I think he might have to draw like another Boros Charm.
Yeah, it's just a Mutavault in the passing of the turn for Bernal. So Fogle's gonna untap those creatures. He'll take a draw. Looks like he may have picked up another copy of Courser here. It doesn't play a huge role. He's got a Mutavault among the lands there. You see the Pulachronos, the Satyr token. Another one can come in here from the Xenagos if he'd like, and the Elvish Mystic. So some real options here for Jack. I mean, there are definitely things to be done here for Fogle. You know, Monstrosity for Pulachronos, things of that nature. But again, basically he has Bernal on a 2-turn clocker. Would only like to play 2 more turns in this game, I think.
Yeah, I think Jack probably just wants to attack with everything. He might hold back the Mystic to cast Courser, but it looks like if he's doing this all pre-combat, he's just going to attack with everything now. So he won't be able to cast a Courser unless he has another land in his hand.
And that one really, I mean, that one won't be that great simply because he won't be gaining a life off of that either. So he's going to take 1. Will Bernal is going to go down to 12, and then Helix is going to push him back up to 16 before damage does resolve from the attack. So Fogle's going to go down to 7. Bernal's going to go up to 16. Then we've got an attack here for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 points of damage. So Bernal's going to end this turn, it looks like at 4, with Fogle at 7. So can he change? Can he piece together the last 7 points is the question.
Yeah, just not sure there's enough burn left in his deck to really do anything.
Helix, yeah, I think.
Oh, Rampager. Okay, so.
Oh, well, that'll do it.
Gorklan Rampager is able to do the last few points of damage to Joe, so Joe didn't even have. And even if he didn't have it, I don't think Joe had enough burn left in his deck.
Yeah, because he doesn't have a. So the problem is that if Fogle doesn't have that, he goes on to 7, but it's not an increment of 3.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big issue there because we know that Bernal's hand is a Magma Jet. Sure, that puts him down to 5. Let's say that Bernal casts Magma Jet on his upkeep. There's nothing he can scry to kill him that turn. He scries into Boros Charm, puts him down to 1. 1 is not 0, obviously. So I don't think there's a because he would cast Jet on his upkeep, have 2 lands left to work with. So I don't think there's anything he could do to get the job done.
His best play was probably Magma Jet you on my upkeep, try to dig into Shock, but he doesn't have Shock in his deck. Like he would needed a 1-mana spell basically because he could attack with the Mutavault as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, Joe didn't really have any outs there. So Jack Fogle wins 1-0 with Jund Monsters defeating Red White Burn.
So we'll take a look here at the sideboards. You've got Bernal's in front of you. What do you see?
He's got a pretty interesting sideboard. He's got 4 Fire Drinker Satyrs, 4 Satyr Fire Dancers, 3 Toil Trouble, and 4 Nyx Fleece Rams. So Nyx Fleece Ram, probably a concession for the mirror. So pretty interesting there. The Satyr Fire Dancer, I think that card's probably coming in just because it's a way for Joe. As we saw in the first game, he kind of had this tough decision. Do I have to go after creatures so I don't die, or do I have to go after his face in order to win? Obviously, in that situation, I think Fire Dancer could have changed everything because it kind of could have bought him some time as well as dealing damage to Jack. So I think Fire Dancer probably comes in. Everything else, though, doesn't really seem that strong. I don't think the Satyrs come in. I don't think the Toil and Trouble comes in. I don't think the Fire Drinker Satyrs come in. Toil Trouble and Nyx Fleece Ram obviously not very good. So I wouldn't be surprised if we just saw maybe the Eidolon of Great Revel get swapped for Satyr Fire Dancer because Eidolon of Great Revel I don't think is that great against a deck like Jund Monsters.
I kind of like Toil Trouble on the play because I don't think they can empty their hand that fast. Like that might just be 3 mana deal 5, which isn't so bad.
Well, I would have minded over a Wildcats just because I hate Wildcats.
Well, I know what side of the camp you're on with that one. We'll take a look at Fogle's board. A lot of 2s and 1s. 2 Golgari Charm and an ultimate price of Putrefy, Mizium Mortars of Doomblade, 3 Nylea's Disciple, of Vraska the Unseen, 3 Mistcutter Hydras, and 2 copies of Rakdos' Return. You like Charm here because it kills enchantments, and assuming that you know that your opponent has Eidolon of Great Revel, that's an enchantment. You believe that they have Satyr Fire Dancer, that's an enchantment creature, and Chain of the Rocks is an enchantment. That 2-of seems like a good place to be. You can make an argument for these instant speed spot removal spells like Ultimate Price and Putrefy to be able to take care of Chandra's Phoenix as well as the other creatures if you like them. But as we saw in the last game, there's a pretty good chance those cards might go dead as well. The one Doomblade, same argument can be made there. The most important card here, I think, however, is Nylea's Disciple. Life gain. It's not going to gain you a ton, but you don't need to gain a ton. You know, if you can undo 1 burn spell, you've done your job.
Yeah, I kind of like the Disciples, the Charms, obviously. Even the prices, I mean, Dreadbore, Mizium Mortars are obviously cards you can take out. Domri's not that great in this matchup either. So kind of want to shed those for something a little more proactive. So yeah, definitely can see those guys coming.
And I have actually seen people board Mistcutter Hydra in this matchup, even though the protection from blue is not very relevant. The fact that you can just have, put basically a 3/3 or 4/4 haste creature.
Yeah.
In some circumstances is more than enough because you are just flat racing in this matchup. That's all that it is, as we saw in that last game. It's just a race to not die against the burn deck. So.
Yeah, I actually don't mind the Rakdos return in this matchup too. Usually on the play though.
Sure.
Because again, this isn't like a typical red aggressive deck where they're just emptying their hand, putting a lot of creatures in play. They rely more on spells. So you can usually, if you can actually Rakdos return them, even for 3, that could usually save you maybe 5 to 6 damage sometimes potentially. So, but again, that's probably a card more for the play than on the draw. So I'm not sure we'll see that at a jack.
As these two players do finish sideboarding up here, we'll begin game 2 here in just a moment for everybody at home. We talk about tier 1 decks of the format. We had our discussion about mono black or black green devotion, whatever you want to classify it as. We talked about mono blue a little bit. We talked about the revelation decks as kind of the tier 1 decks of the format and Jund monsters, but we didn't actually talk about red white burn at all. How do you feel about this deck and kind of its place in the format? Do we feel like this is a tier 1 deck? We saw it win in Knoxville, or is it just kind of, it's just kind of here?
I don't think it's a tier 1 deck. I think it's a tier 2 deck that can take advantage of certain metagame holes. So given in the right weekend, I think you could do pretty well. But I don't, decks like that I don't consider tier 1. I consider decks that are tier 1, I consider something that you can go into any tournament regardless of what the metagame is, and you can have a realistic shot of winning. Red white burn, I think you have to get a little more, like, compare it to a deck like mono black devotion. Mono black devotion not only is set up pretty well game 1 against a wide variety of decks in the format, but after board, you can really become a finely tuned machine against any specific matchup you're afraid of. Whereas red white burn, you have some pretty bad matchups, and you have certain matchups where you kind of really need a little help against. So I think red white burn is more of a deck where you kind of need to make sure that you get the right metagame for it to really be a good choice. Any deck like that, it's hard for me to consider a tier 1 deck. Like Sphinx Revelation decks, Jund monsters, mono black devotion, they don't care so much about what matchups they're playing against. They just care about, my deck is really powerful, I'm going to be very consistent. The red white deck, I mean, I hope my opponent doesn't have Farika's Cure this weekend. I hope the mono black decks aren't really prepared with a lot of life gain. I hope that the blue-white decks don't have like Nyx Fleece Rams in their sideboard this particular weekend. It all depends on the right metagame, because a lot of times this deck will really exploit people who are just, I'm a deck that all the decks this weekend are probably going to try to beat mid-range decks. Sure. Which means that their sideboard aren't going to be prepared for red-white burn decks. But in general, though, I think that the red-white burn deck just has to deal with too many hateful sideboard cards for it to do really well consistently week in and week out. I think the people are fighting and starting to respect this deck a little bit, and I think that's off of the back of Wynn's win in Knoxville. We're starting to see cards like Staff of the Death Magus again. We're starting to see Nylea's Disciple show up in sideboards. Ways to gain life, ways to kind of combat the strategy, because we've seen burn in other formats, of course. Oh, yeah. I think decks like this are always cyclical. It's like they'll win one weekend because no one was ready for them, and then they're back on everyone's radar, so they kind of die off for a couple of weeks, and then everyone forgets about them again, and they kind of crop up and they win something else. So it's all just cyclical. But decks like that, it's hard for me to consider them tier 1 simply because they kind of rely on the right weekend. Game 2 underway. Bernal with a Temple of Triumph. It is time to scry here. Top card's going to go to the bottom before passing it back to Fogle, who will draw a card with his Jund Monsters deck. He has a Temple of his own and Temple of Abandon. Taking a look at a Pulachronos, that's going to go to the bottom. That one was important for him to win game number 1, but apparently he does not need it for game number 2. Bernal going to play another Temple. Take a look at the top card. Consult the grip really quickly here. And that one's going to stay on top as he passes it back to Fogle, who will draw a card for his second turn. We'll see if he has a mana accelerant this go around. I hate when my opponent scries and they keep. For some reason, I just always feel bad. It's like when they ponder and they keep. I'm like, ugh. Well, if they ponder and keep, you're dead. Yeah. We've learned that by now. You're just not winning. Fogle's going to take 2 to play that Sylvan Caryatid, so down to 18 he goes. So kind of similar start to the first game. Fogle's able to get accelerant into play. And Joe really doesn't have any pressure just yet. This is not too surprising given that he is a burn deck, but here we're probably going to see Chandra's Phoenix show come down.
Yep, and there's an attack for 2. So Fogle's going to go down to 16. Bernal takes 2 from the Sacred Foundry, so he goes down to 18. And Sacred Foundry was the card that he kept on top of his deck, so he felt that he really needed a land to keep things going. He also has a Temple in his hand as well this turn, but he obviously felt it was very important to be able to cast Chandra's Phoenix on time instead of on turn number 4. So we'll see if this ends up working out for him, as he's off to a really nice start this particular game. You know, if Phoenix, I kind of look at Phoenix's card as if it gets in 2 hits, it's basically been a char, and that's all you can really ask for.
Yeah. And against Jund monsters, they really don't have a lot of ways to interact with the Phoenix. They can't block it very well, and they don't have that much removal. And after board, they might have even less. So here we're going to see Fogle take yet another 2 damage to get a threat into play, and it's Ganili's Disciple. But, you know, not that impressive considering he needed to take 2 to cast this. It was effectively just gaining 1 life this turn.
Yeah, down to 14, up to 17. The Phoenix will put him down to 15 with the attack. And, you know, that's assuming that he doesn't have another Phoenix to play. So
it looked like that might have been a pretty good draw for Joe. It looks like it might have been a Satyr Fire Dancer.
That one can get out of control pretty quickly, especially when the shields are down right now, too. For Fogle, there's a Temple. See, Joe also has Nylon and Great Revel in his hand. He's going to take a look at the top card. That one goes to the bottom immediately. Did not like what he saw. Eidolon's actually a really interesting card in this matchup, but shelf life kind of varies. I feel like there are definitely some games that it'll be good. I also think there'll be some situations where it's good, but, you know, when you're working your way into the mid game, that's when, you know, the Jund Monster deck wants to play cards like Pull Chronos and Store Breath Dragon and stuff like that, and none of it's cheap spells.
Yeah, I think it's, once you get past turn 4, I actually think that you could probably take more damage from it than your opponent.
Yeah.
Which is why it's a little bit concerning for me that it's still in the deck, but we'll see how it plays out. Fogle's got at least a way to attack Joe now. But as we know, Joe has plenty of answers to a 3/3. It's not really the Apollo Chronos type threat like we saw in first game.
Joe, again, does have Eidolon and Satyr Fire Dancer in hand, but he did not play either. He just passes the turn back here. So Fogle's going to start by attacking Bernal for 3. So we're even up here at 15. Let's see what the follow-up's going to be. It looks like it might be a Rampager, and it is.
Yeah, I think Bernal didn't want to expose his Satyr Fire Dancer until he can actually get some value out of it.
Now, the one thing that Bernal does have in his hand, he has a Skullcrack that he can play at the end of turn here if he wants to. However, you know, he might want to get the value with the Skullcrack plus the Fire Dancer play, but it looks like he may just fire this off now. We'll see what he wants to, what kind of move he wants to make, because he also has a Lightning Strike. Yeah, that's actually what he's going to cast. Put Fogle down to 12.
Yeah, so on his turn now, he can cast a Satyr Fire Dancer and potentially the Skullcrack as well to deal with the Nylea's Disciple.
Chain of the Rocks is a pretty nice draw, too.
Oh, wow. So yeah, a lot of options here for Joe. I kind of like just chaining the Rampager and attacking.
Do you want to play one of the creatures now? Like, he didn't want to expose Satyr Fire Dancer last turn, and casting Eidolon here is a little bit awkward when your plan the following turn might be Fire Dancer plus Skullcrack you.
Yeah. Well, the only reason I might not play the Fire Dancer is because then you won't have access to Skullcrack anymore. You don't have enough mana. So then if your opponent, if Jack casts like another Nylea's Disciple or like a Courser and then plays a land, you can't prevent that life loss.
Well, we're going to go with the Fire Dancer. I'm probably just going to wait on the Skullcrack. I guess he doesn't have to move right now. I guess he can just wait.
Well, the only problem is he can't do it mid-combat.
That's true. Because of Rampager. He cannot do it mid-combat.
So if he's going to do it, you probably want to do it on Jack's upkeep or prior to combat.
I mean, there's also the argument that can be made, like, if he's fine with just taking like a big hit in the face here, like it would be an attack for 7. And he doesn't move, but it looks like, yeah, I'm going to Skullcrack right now.
Yeah, Skullcrack's going to turn off any life gain for the
That's
turn
true.
anyway, and there's no instant speed life gain that he's probably afraid of, so I like this play. Whether it's the upkeep or before combat, attackers are declared, it's fine.
I mean, he could get blown out, presumably by a removal spell here from Fogle on the Satyr Fire Dancer, so it makes it so it won't kill anything.
Yeah.
That's one problem that could occur here.
Well, I think it's definitely a concern for Joe, but I think he's going to make this play regardless. Like, you're going to play your Fire Dancer on your turn. You could cast Skullcrack on your turn, but then you leave yourself open to Jack gaining life on his turn. So I think Joe's willing to take the risk just to make sure Jack can't gain any life potentially. Because I think, obviously being able to deal 3 here, especially with the race is going to be very, very close.
You can see Fogle considering his options right now. if he's going to make a move or not, as that Skullcrack is still on the stack here. Assuming that does resolve, Fogle would be down to 7. Phoenix can work its way down to 5. In a perfect world, Bernal's Fire Dancer lives. It takes down the Nylea's Disciple, and can't forget, Bernal has a War Leader's Helix in his hand. But it looks like Fogle does have something to do, and it's a Doomblade to take care of the Fire Dancer. So Nylea's Disciple is not going to bite the dust, but the Skullcrack will still get the job done. And now here's an attack. Fogle's at 7. Bernal's going to take 7. He's going to go down to 8.
Yeah, so Joe does have a chain to the rocks to deal with the Rampager, but oh, wow. So Scavenging Ooze comes down. So big card there for Fogle. Not only does it give it like a little robust threat, he does have Sylvan Caryatid up to actually activate it.
That's really interesting. Like, the one life gain that he can gain this turn might end up being all that he needs.
Yeah.
It's 8 to 7 right now. There's only one creature in the graveyard, but that one life that could push Fogle up to 8 could really mess up the math here, because again, Bernal's under the gun from those 2 creatures, and Scavenging Ooze gets into the red zone as well.
The real problem here is that Fogle has a Stormbreath Dragon in his hand as well. So I'm just not sure Joe, if Joe attacks with the Chandra's Phoenix, then he's basically just dead to the Stormbreath Dragon.
Pretty hard not to.
Yeah. He's got a War Leader's Helix. It looks like Joe might just have to pass here.
Man. I think I'm considering like the ramifications of chaining something right now, and if that does anything.
If he has a War Leader's Helix in his hand, I don't think he can afford to cast Chain.
Helix would put Joe. Let's assume that Fogle's turn is just tap out, cast Stormbreath Dragon, attack with my 4/4s, and my Ooze will be a 3/3, and my Disciple will be a 3/3. You Helix yourself up to 12. You put Fogle down to 3. You chump block something with the Phoenix. You take 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You live.
Well, think of it this way. War Leader's Helix and Chain to the Rocks are basically the same play. If you cast Chain to the Rocks, you're going after the Rampager.
Okay.
So you're basically saving yourself 4 damage either way. With the Helix play, though, you're also reducing Fogle down to 3.
Sure.
So then, technically, if you have a 1 hit from the Phoenix plus any other burn spell in your hand, and Jack could just be dead. There's only 1 creature in your graveyard. So he's only going to be able to gain 1 life, so I think he's dead no matter what. So I think if you're Joe, the smart play is we're probably just pass, playing around Stormbreath Dragon.
Okay. We can't forget, too, that, assuming that all of this stuff that we're talking about happens and the Phoenix blocks something, the Ooze would be able to remove that, and Fogle would be able to gain another life. So the Helix would put him down to 3, but he'd be able to gain a life. Well, actually, so Fogle would go up to 8, and then Helix would put him down to 4, and then he'd be able to gain a life and go up to 5. So something to keep in mind. I think I'm with you at this point, where I think maybe you just have to hold the Helix. But it looks like Joe is considering casting Chain here, and he is.
Oh, he might be trying to chain the Ooze and then Skullcrack in response. Yeah. Unfortunately, he doesn't realize that the Stormbreath Dragon is looming in the wings.
But he still might be okay, though. Assuming the Phoenix doesn't attack, he
if
still
the
might be
Phoenix
okay.
doesn't attack, yeah. It all comes down to whether or not the Phoenix attacks.
He's going to go after the Rampager, which is the biggest creature out there. So that kind of makes some sense. So the Rampager is chained to the rocks now. You have to assume that. I can't imagine Bernal doing anything.
I don't know. Like, the thing is, if his last burn spell was, no, he would have gained. He'd be able to gain 2 life, go up to 9.
Will he attack? If he attacks, he loses.
I'm not sure.
If he attacks, he loses.
Well, he has another creature. It looks like he has a chump blocker in his hand, an Eidolon. So you can play the Eidolon a Great Revel as a chump blocker, basically.
Yeah, but I mean, does that really accomplish very much? Because I don't think you want to, and he's not going to attack, it looks like. Because I don't think that playing Eidolon does anything. I think that it's too important for you just to Skullcrack and then Helix. Like, I think that's the big play at this point. See if Jack activates this. He's going to. And this is probably going to buy out the Skullcrack now, I would assume. Yeah. So Jack activates Scavenging Ooze with the Sylvan Caryatid to remove the Satyr Fire Dancer to attempt to gain a life. However, that's not going to happen because of Skullcrack. So now Fogle goes down to 4. And Bernal, with this Phoenix back on defense, and a War Leader's Helix in hand, he, in theory, has enough to get the job done here. But that Scavenging Ooze, because of the block with Chandra's Phoenix, looks like things might get messed up a little bit here. But again, this assumes that Jack is going to cast the Stormbreath Dragon and everything that we've talked about up to this point. There's a forest. There's a dragon.
Stormbreath Dragon.
Man, everyone's coming in the red zone now.
If Jack makes a mistake and doesn't activate the Scavenging Ooze on his turn, then Joe could technically still try to, if depending on how Jack sequences this, he could just try to get the Phoenix back with the burn spell.
Yeah.
But it looks like he's going to get smart play right away.
So Fogle's going to go up to 5 here. Bernal takes his damage. He's going to untap. He's got a Warleader's Helix in hand. Picks up a copy of Skullcrack. And he is going to pick up the rest of his permanents. Jack Fogle going to win this match over Joel Bernal. 2-0. Jund Monsters getting the job done over Red, White, Burn. Fogle starts off this tournament 2-0.
So, unfortunately for Joe, I think if he actually just plays the Warrior Leader's Helix, he ends up winning that game. Because he ended up drawing a second Skullcrack. So he wouldn't be able to go Skullcrack.
Yeah, you're right about that. He would have ran off another 3 damage spell to get the job done.
And that was my main point about the Chain to the Rocks play, is that if Chain to the Rocks if you're passing Chain to the Rocks to basically save yourself 4 damage, Warrior Leader's Helix does the same thing, except you get to use all your mana this turn, and you give yourself more outs to draw cards that could win you the game.
Sure.
So I think that even though you're preventing Jack from gaining 1 life, I don't think it matters that much, because he would have been at 4.
Yeah, he goes 7. He was at 7 that turn. He's going to remove the Phoenix. He's going to remove the Fire Dancer, go up to 8.
He goes up to 8. You drop him to 4. You chump block, he goes to 5.
Yeah, he goes to 5 with Other's activation, then double Skullcrack.
You have a Skullcrack in your hand.
Yep.
So if you draw any 2 damage burn spell, even, you win.
Yeah, if you draw a Jet or something like that.
Yeah. So I think he just has more outs if he just casts Helix.
One thing not to overlook there as well, one of the cards that he ended the game with in his hand was Eidolon, the Great Revel. And when you think of Eidolon, it's a card that you want to cast on turn 2 or at some point in the game to have an impact. And I don't think at any point in the game that card would have impact.
It would have been much worse for him if he ever had it.
Yeah.
So that was one of the reasons I kind of mentioned I thought it would end up getting sideboarded out for this matchup.
Yeah, it doesn't. Again, it seems like it's really good on like turn 2 and